Jewish symbology. What are Jewish symbols? If you were going to write a little guide of icons, you know, maybe if you wanted to represent on a map a synagogue, you might use a what?
Star of David. Menorah.
Star of David. Pardon my drawing. A what? Menorah. Let's see.
As it turns out, a dreidel. I'm looking on the wall there.
Like that?
A dreidel. Look at the wall.
You mean one of those?
No.
Yes, that kind, not a Chanukiah.
Not a Chanukiah, okay. So we'll come back to the artistry there. But what else do we have? A dreidel? So you mean if you were to put that on a map of some kind, you think that would help?
No,
not so much. Okay, well maybe not.
A Torah.
A Torah, okay. And you can take your choice of whether you want to have the closed or the open kind. Thank you. Any other symbols that might work to represent Jews or Judaism?
The Ark.
The Ark? Which Ark?
Which ark, right? The old
Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant. All right. How do I draw that? Well, let's assume that we're talking general box shape, and we got some poles, and then there's something at the top. we'll leave it at that.
Shabbat candlesticks.
Maybe some Shabbat candlesticks. Maybe you're going to make me draw braided challah, and the challah under the cover. Okay.
A wine cup.
Maybe a kiddush cup. Okay. Anything else that's generally used? A chai. We want to go for our lettering.
Chamsa.
A chamsa, if you want to be a little bit more culturally broad. Let's see how. I can never quite get that down right. It's like the hand, but it's an equal number of thumbs and so. Chamsa, yeah, we know what that's supposed to be. You can tell I don't doodle that much. Any other symbols? What about one from 2 weeks ago? One that you might find if you open this one thing up.
10 tablets.
The Shnei Luchot, exactly, the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets of the covenant, generally represented like that, a la the Sisa B'Damil, but quite likely from many other sources, probably more like that. There's actually no description whatsoever within Jewish sources that there were rounded tops to the 10 Commandments. That's an artist convention, but probably not an accurate archaeological description of what they look like. If I asked you to make these, how many of these do you think you could make well? And by well, I mean accurately, so that they could fulfill their purpose. Kiddush cup? Can you make one of those?
To fulfill its purpose accurately.
Yeah, okay, it's a cup, right? You can take a styrofoam cup and you've got a Kiddush cup. So Kiddush cup, no problem. What about, chai, excuse me there. Forgot what letter I was writing. Think we could make one of those? Yeah, because if I can draw it on a whiteboard, you can make it any other way. Star of David, no problem. Challah, no problem. Candlesticks,
Easy.
very easy peasy. Chamsa, you could probably all do better than me. Reproduction of the 10 Commandment tablets? Maybe, probably. I mean, it's, we can get into another discussion another day of exactly which script was used on them. But generally speaking, we probably could get something that looked pretty close to what they were. Torah? It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of skill. Given enough time, given enough training, given enough opportunity and tutelage, do you think you could probably make one that was considered kasher? Probably. All right, and we already said that this wasn't, which means of the Jewish symbols, we've got 2 here that I don't hear a lot of comments on. Can we make a menorah?
If you know how to work in proper metals.
If you're a metal worker, no problem. Yeah.
Clay.
What's that?
Clay.
A clay? Well, certainly we can all make the menorah that we made in kindergarten, where you just have a little blob of clay and you push the candles into it. But I'm talking about the menorah, not a menorah. Remember, the word menorah just means lamp. But when we say the menorah, we're speaking about a very specific lamp.
I think you could follow the instructions as they're presented here, except for the base.
Except for the base? Bit of a question mark about the
I
base?
think so.
I think so too. And I'm actually going to say there are going to be some question marks about all of it. In fact, I would be willing to argue that it is easier to imagine what the ark looked like, give or take what we do with our cheruvim, the angels on top. But the rest of the ark is much more straightforward in its description and its construction than the menorah itself. All right, so we're going to take a look at that, and we may even get to be able to discuss why it matters.
About 150-pound block of pure gold that you have to hammer out.
You don't think that's easy?
No.
Okay, well, let's take a look and make sure that we all are on the same page, or at least scroll, for those instructions. But Nikki?
What about that menorah by the Knesset, that big one?
What about that giant bronze, I think it's bronze, it looks bronze, menorah outside the Knesset? Is that the menorah?
Well, no, but I mean, they made a menorah.
They made a menorah, but I mean, I have a menorah sitting on my desk. You know, it's I have lamps all over the place, whether they be electric, oil, candle, whatever. The question is, the menorah as described in today's parasha of Terumah.
Are they trying to make a menorah for the part of the third temple?
The Temple Institute has indeed created a new menorah out of gold, and that's another question. But let's see if we can figure out from the instructions itself what this thing even looks like. Because there may be elements of it that we're unfamiliar with.
What about the menorah we use for Hanukkah, where we have a ninth place for that?
Well, we don't only have a ninth. For Hanukkah, we actually add on 2 whole extra candles. 2 whole extra candle holders. And we'll come back to the connection between this menorah and what we use for Hanukkah a little ways in. Can you hold your question till then? Okay. So, Terumah, we are going to begin on page 487, if you're in your Eitzheim Chumash, which is chapter 25 of the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, and verse 10. A little on the stuffy side in here. Try and get the fan to circulate the air a bit. All right. How are we doing? All set? Ready to go? Volunteer for the English reading descriptions? Someone who likes reading instructions? I didn't say you had to follow instructions. I said someone who likes to read instructions.
They shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long. Of course, I remember Bill Cosby saying, "Lord, what's a cubit?" Right?
What is a cubit,
What
by
is
the
a
way?
cubit?
Exactly. What is a cubit? It's generally described as being the distance from the tip of your middle finger to your elbow, which is usually rounded off to be about 18 inches. So if you want to do a quick and dirty math for how the sizes are, just take these dimensions and multiply them by 18 inches. And you can complain to the imperial measurements of why multiplying by 18 is so much harder than if we had metric. But
So it's 2.5 cubits long,
Mhm.
a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high.
all right, so we got a nice rectangular block.
487.
Overlaid with pure gold, overlaid inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of the side walls and 2 on the other. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be removed from it. And deposit in the ark the tablets of the pact, which I will give you.
All right, how are we doing on that description? It's a big gold box
Yeah.
with a wooden box inside, with a gold box inside of that. We got 3 layers, right? Gold on the outside, then wood, then gold again on the inside, so that it's wood covered in gold outside and in.
There's something else that I've noted. It's cast 4 rings of gold.
Mhm.
That's a particular way of working with metal.
Absolutely.
It's very, very difficult, very different than hammering.
It is indeed, and these rings are then affixed on the side of the ark, and then the pole is slid through them, For what purpose?
Carry.
To carry it, exactly, which is also explaining why we don't remove the poles. Because the poles are left in there so that if we need to move the ark, we lift on the poles rather than picking up the ark itself. Make sense? Okay, now we got to put a top on this thing.
Okay, so you shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5
I.e. no wooden layer, just solid gold slab.
2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherubim of gold and make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end, the other cherub at the other end. Of one piece with the cover, you shall make the cherubim at its 2 ends.
All right, let's make sure we understand the description of the work that's going on here. You've got a giant, well, giant by gold standards, slab of gold, and out of that slab of gold will flow up, hammered from it, 2 cherubim. All right, these are not separate, either cast or hammered constructions that are then soldered to the cover. You make the gold and then you hammer it up and out from the slab so that it's all one piece. Make sense? Sound tricky?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't exactly remember where we are, but aren't these the people who made this lovely golden calf in the middle of the desert?
They are and they aren't.
So they have some talent with this?
Well, I remember it was Aaron that made the golden calf, so and he's not given the job of making this. But there is a little bit of an incongruity. The section we are reading now, in terms of the order of the parshiot, comes before the golden calf. However, according to rabbinic interpretation, it comes after the golden calf. So there are a number of places within the Torah where the order of the verses or the parshiot is not necessarily the order of events as they transpired, but for different reasons, God put them in different places. We discovered that when we were talking in Parashat Yitro, that there are many opinions that say that the discussion of Yitro and Moses about how to do all the judging and all of that actually took place after the revelation at Sinai, not before, because after all, if it happened before, what was he judging? They didn't have the Torah yet. And it was put there more as a pedagogical reason to show that not all of the non-Jews are like Amalek, who had just attacked us in the previous chapter, but that some of them are like Yitro, meaning righteous. We do know that there is a broad rabbinic principle that you can't always rely on the order of the parshiot in order to say exactly when the events happen. But generally, the rabbis assumed that this was taking place after the golden calf. So yeah, there is a little bit of skill happening here. All right, keep going.
The cherubim shall have their wings spread out, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, the faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark. After depositing inside the ark the pact that I will give you, there I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the 2 cherubim that are on top of the ark of the pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people.
All right, so this is going to be the focal point of focal points within the focal point of the tabernacle, which itself has its own focal point, the Holy of Holies, which itself was the focal point of the camp, which itself was essentially the focal point of the world. So we're concentric circles coming down to this spot in between the 2 angels over the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Clear? All right. So apart from the details of exactly how the cherubim looked, is there any part of this that is unclear of what the overall structure looked like? Not so much. Right? It's pretty straightforward. I mean, how they specifically shaped the faces of the angels, what their wings actually looked like, we can get into details of, did they actually have bat-like wings? Were they bird-like wings? But generally, we got the general form here, and we can draw a sketch even better than my lovely artistic rendering here, and be fairly certain that we are pretty close. That if we were to show it to someone in the ancient world who had seen the actual Ark of the Covenant, they would know what we were trying to show them a picture of.
Again, with hammering pure gold, you can take pure gold nuggets, which I've already let you know, the higher carat, higher weight gold, it's very soft, and it can easily be hammered and put into things.
Yeah, pure gold is very malleable.
But it's the casting which always gets me, because that's unusual.
It is, it is. All right, let's continue our unusual instructions, because we have a few more things to make.
You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Make a rim of a hand's breadth around it, and make a gold molding for its rim round about. Make 4 gold rings for it, and attach the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings shall be next to the rim as holders for poles to carry the table. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. By these the table shall be carried. Make its bowls, ladles, jars, and jugs with which to offer libations. Make them of pure gold. And on the table you shall set the bread of display to be before me always.
All right, so this is the table that also stood inside the Mishkan, and on it was what's called the lechem panim, or often translated as showbread. Show me the bread. And description, pretty straightforward. It's a wood table with gold, and you got a little lip around the edge of it, and this is how big it is. No problem. Now we get to the fun one.
Oh. You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base and its shaft, its cups, calyxes, and petals shall be of one piece. 6 branches shall issue from its sides, 3 branches from one side of the lampstand, and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand. On one branch there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals. And on the next branch, there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself, there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, a calyx of 1 piece with it under a pair of branches, and a calyx of 1 piece with it under the second pair of branches, and a calyx of 1 piece with it under the last pair of branches. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand. Their calyxes and their stems shall be of 1 piece with it, and the whole of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. Make its 7 lamps. The lamps shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side, and its tongues and fire pans of pure gold. It shall be made with all these furnishings out of a talent of pure gold. Note well and follow the patterns for them that are being shown you on the mountain.
Okay, that's clear, right?
It's about as clear as the other one.
Is it clear?
Well,
What's a calyx?
What does an almond blossom look like?
well, maybe they do.
Yes,
What was that?
yes.
Yes, they would have known what it,
I'm not.
Botanically,
gonna
yes.
teach this, right, but, what's interesting in all of this is how many botanical references there are. Calyxes, blossoms, almonds. It sort of asks the reader, I think, to look to nature, but it has to be the nature of Eretz Yisrael, not nature here, for a plant that might anatomically match the description in the text. And what is such a plant?
But I've been in the desert there where they were. There isn't a plant to be seen other than cactuses, it's 7. There are no almond blossoms out there.
so where were these Israelites standing in the middle of the Midbar of Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai,
They just come from Egypt.
going to get an example of an almond blossom and its branches and all of that?
From Egypt.
From Egypt?
They remembered it from there.
Or they remembered it from Egypt? Because they don't have one maybe in front of them?
Probably not.
Maybe? Or does the text give us a clue? Last line we read.
God's gonna show it to you.
Yeah, as I showed you. As I showed you. So there is already a little bit of trying to help the reader out by saying, yeah, you're right. They didn't exactly have a botanical garden in front of them from which to choose examples that they could then use for their construction. But it's okay, God took care of that show and tell aspect and made sure that there was a clear vision of what the product was meant to look like. Make sense? Okay. we're going to go ahead and, rather than trying to discuss this more, I want to make sure we got our terminology straight. So, I'm going to pass around our handout so that we can get our words right. Because I don't know about you, but the word calyx doesn't mean anything to me in English. It's one of those great examples of translating a Hebrew word into an equally incomprehensible English word. I'm sure that there's somebody here who knows what a calyx is. What's that? Right. Exactly. It's the little part underneath it that holds the blossom. We're talking about pistils and stamens, and well, we don't have any of those, but what we do have, if you look at the picture here on the front page, is we have a, let's see if I can sort of pin that up here so I can get my hand free to point. We have a diagram that explains what the different pieces are that are being mentioned. So we have at the very top, right, a perach, what's being called as a flower. All right, and that's the part that actually is going to hold where the flame will be coming from. Okay, not what you might have thought, which is the gviyah, which is the cups. Those are not the cups for the oil. Those are these decorative flanges that are along the shaft of the branches. How we doing?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have our wonderful calyx, which is the Hebrew word kaftor, which is being represented in this diagram by those ball-shaped protuberances. I don't know if the word protuberance helps, but hopefully you can see where the arrow is pointing. They actually define it as knob. The general translation from classical English is knop, K-N-O-P. I prefer the word kaftor, because at least I know the Hebrew word, and the English words just make me feel like my vocabulary is bad in English. I don't mind having a bad ancient Hebrew botanical vocabulary, but I'm a little sensitive about my English. So we'll use the Hebrew word kaftor generally for that. Okay, but that's the word that's been translated here as calyx. How are we doing? No problem? Okay, so let's see if we can make sure we get a little bit more explanation about this. We're actually going to skip to the second paragraph where it says, said Samuel or said Shmuel. Who'd like to read a little Talmud for us as we take this apart? Julia, thank you.
Said Samuel in the name of elder, the height of candlestick was 18
Hand breadths.
hand breadth.
Right.
3 of the base and its flower on top of it. 2 hand breadth on adorn. 1 hand breadth for the cup, the knot, and the flower.
All right, let's make sure we understand what we're talking about here, right? So the whole thing altogether was 18 high, from base to top. And then they're going to break it apart as we go. Not literally breaking it apart, of course. So we've got a base at the bottom, right? And then we have, so that's 3 hand breadths for the base, as well as its flower, its perach. See how there's a little flange at the bottom there? So from that flange at the bottom down to the base, that was 3 hand breadths. And then 2 hand breadths unadorned, meaning of unadorned shaft. And then 1 hand breadth for the cup, right? The giviyah. And then a kaftor and a perach going up above that. See that little cluster right there? Right? And then 2 more hand breadths unadorned. And then our first of the kaftor, where we branch. Are you okay so far? So just we're imagining this as we go up the shaft. And as we encounter each element, it's giving us the distance between them. Okay? Okay. Julia, please keep going.
1 hand breadth along, 1 hand breadth canal, out of which 2 branches emerge, 1 on each side, rising up to the same height as candlestick.
Okay, so meaning that the branches that emerge here first have to eventually get as high as the total height. So even though they come out let's make sure we're going to sort of rule out different options. So this is ground level, and we'll deal with the base later, but we are coming up, and we get our first branch junction, and they go out, and the text is making sure we understand that eventually, somehow, we'll do a little, somehow between this level and the top of the overall structure, it ends up being the same height. Don't think that it comes out like that and that that's where your flame is what it's trying to rule out for us. Okay, don't think that it just goes out level and then maybe you'd have another one like that and then the top one like that. And it would be sort of staggered, right? It's making sure that we understand that somehow between this junction point and the top where the flame comes out, you increase your elevation to your total of 18.
So they're the same level.
So that all of them at the top will be on the same level, exactly. All of the flames will be at the same level. That makes sense? We see how we could have easily misunderstood it if it hadn't pointed that out to us? Is that a question or just stretching? Stretching. Okay, Julia.
Then 100 breath plan. 100 breath for a canal out of which two branches emerge. One on each side, rising up to the same height as the candlestick. Then 200 breath on adorned. That left 300 breath in which were 3 cups, a canal and a flower.
Okay, we got all that? And by the time we get to the top, we end up with, well, you can see even better from the drawing than what I've got here. By the time your shaft is up there, you're going to have this 1, 2, 3 little of the cup-like structures, your kaftor, and then the flower cup at the top where the actual flame. Okay? So you're going to have some sort of structure along the shaft that has those elements. And the way this drawing has it is that all of those are sort of bunched up at the top. Make sense? Okay. And then we're going to get a little bit more reference to what this actually looked like. Julia, keep reading the next little bit.
What were the cups like? They were like cups from Alexandria. Wide at the top and then tapered down towards the base.
All right, so that's why our drawing shows them as this sort of tapered cone look for the shaft. Just so you know that they're wide and then slanted. It's not another shape that you might have imagined. Oh, question?
When you're reading verse 37.
37, yes.
It says the lamp shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side.
Correct.
The light comes, I don't understand how it's just
Ah.
going to be on the front side.
That's a very good question, and one that's actually one of the easier things to explain of this particular topic. There's a lot of other things that are confusing, but the way that ancient lamps work, we got a pretty good understanding of that, which is if you imagine a lamp now, most of the time people imagine a candle, right, with a flame. And thanks to hot air rising and all of that, the flame is in the center and it goes straight up. No problem. And when people imagine oil lamps nowadays, they imagine sort of like those old, hurricane type lanterns where you had a like cloth wick that would burn, and then underneath you'd have a reservoir of oil, right? That's all modern. That's not how lamps used to work. The way lamps used to work is you would have, and bear with me for the sake of perspective, you'd have some sort of bowl that contained oil, and if you just dropped a wick in the middle of that, it would lay down, and then who knows, the fire would just go everywhere. So instead, what you would do is with your bowl, is you would have the wick hang over the edge, and then you would light it, and it would burn, and it would continue to draw from the bowl and feed the flame. But that means, if you're looking straight down on the bowl, you have to pick where you want to put your wick. And so when it says put them all on the front side, then it means that they need to be all orientated in a particular way. Don't just put the wicks on it all higgledy-piggledy. That's one of those technical Aramaic terms, higgledy-piggledy. So, thank my grandfather, may he rest in peace, for that term. Okay. Any other questions? I like questions that I can actually answer, because there can be a lot of questions on this that I can't.
Some of the old menorahs have just a straight line of little cups, and then they have like a shield in the back,
Right.
sort of a reflector. Is that anything part of any of the instructions?
So what Sally's pointing out is that for a lot of the menorahs that we use for Hanukkah, you end up with just little cups at the bottom. I lost count. How am I doing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. And then maybe you might have a higher cup for a shamash or something, and then behind it you get some sort of brass or whatever reflecting. That doesn't sound like this, does it? There's no branches here, no cups, no calyxes, thank God. And that's because this type of menorah is not meant to be this menorah. The mitzvah of lighting the candles for Hanukkah was not intended, nor is it fulfilled only by lighting a menorah shaped like the menorah that was in the temple. As I said, that's one of the confusions of using the word menorah, is that menorah is a generic word for lamp. So we're talking about a menorah, and we're talking about the menorah. So the menorah, capital T, capital M, is the one and only menorah that was made in the Mishkan, as we're describing here. The idea that we would light a Chanukiah, that is to say a menorah specifically built for Hanukkah, in the shape of the menorah that was in the temple, is a relatively modern invention. As was, in fact, even having a dedicated menorah of any construction. There is a great deal of evidence that historically, when people wanted to light candles for Hanukkah, they would just line up little oil lamps. And you just light one more than you did the night before. But the idea of having a purpose-built lamp just for Hanukkah is, again, a relatively modern, probably about 500 years, and then building it in the shape of the menorah of Jerusalem is probably even more modern still. And as we're going to see, maybe even problematic. So yes, that's why you saw ones like this, because there was no requirement. There wasn't even an imagined requirement to make a menorah that was the same shape as the menorah that stood in the Mishkan and then later in the temple. So,
It's a sort of a decorative thing.
exactly. It was saying, you know, we're going to have to light these lights anyway. Why not make something special for Hanukkah rather than just stacking up candlesticks or, you know, lining up oil lamps? Which is a good idea. I mean, I think it's good. We've got quite a few in my house, but there wasn't a requirement to have a dedicated object. If you just had 8 candlesticks at home that you could keep relatively even so you could see the right number of nights, you could just light your 8 candlesticks.
Yeah, I have a number of menorahs and they're all different.
Exactly.
styles.
Okay, let's finish our botanical references.
What were the Canucks like? They were like apples from fruit. What were the flowers like? They were like the blossoms around the petals of columns. It turns out that there were 22 cups, 11 Canucks, and 9 flowers.
Exactly. We all got the math. So they're trying to give us a little bit more explanation from the Talmud, from the Bavli, of exactly what shape these things were in. Okay? But there's one question that remains unanswered. We now know, or at least have some good indication, of how many of these decorative cups we have, the flanges, how many of the kaftor that we have, the knop or the calyx or whatever you want to call it. We know that we got the petals at the top. We know pretty much how long the thing is. What shape are the branches?
Round.
What's that?
Round.
Round?
The side ones are.
What's that?
She's hammered.
It's hammered, so we know how, whatever shape they were, how they were made. But you can hammer straight or you can hammer round.
Curved, I should say.
Curved? Semicircles?
It says semicircle.
Where did it say that? The picture I gave you on the front shows semicircle.
Circle in order to make the drawing easier.
Or was that what it actually was? What's that?
She's at the bottom here.
Ah!
Torah.
Oh, no, we're not there yet. And that's actually not talking about the shape of the branches.
That's-
But we're going to get to that line in just a second. But I just wanted to point out that with all of the detail we have been given so far, the actual shape of the branches has not been mentioned. Now, most of us assume from the menorah that we have seen that it's something like that, right? That's a very common way of drawing a menorah. We've got one on the wall right over there. But is that the only way to get from a middle shaft up to the same height? No. Another option would be going like that, you know, with your central shaft. Another option would be going straight out and then up to the same height. Well, let's see if we can figure out what it was meant to be. All right, so let's go ahead, and at the bottom we're looking at Rambam. This is Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah, his commentary on the Mishnah, and during it he tries to give a little bit more information and uniquely gives us a diagram. Ooh, ancient diagrams. Okay, so who'd like to read a little Rambam? Starts off pretty straightforward, and then...
It had 3 legs?
Yeah, it had 3 legs.
It had 3 legs.
So that's referring to the base of it.
A gavia is the form of a solid, not hollow cup, except that it gets narrow towards the bottom, or if you wish, it has the shape of a cone whose tip has been cut off.
All right, sound familiar, right? That's our little decorative flange bits that are along the shaft. So it's a tapered cone with the bottom cut off, so it doesn't go straight to a point, but it's got that generalish shape.
A kaftor is the form of a sphere that is not exactly circular, but somewhat elongated, close to the shape of a bird's egg.
All right, those are our knots, our calyxes, and he's given us an idea that this is somehow a slightly pointy circle rather than perfectly round.
A perat is the form of a blossom of a lily.
And that was the one way up at the top, and the one that the Bobli had described as being the decorative shape at the top of a pillar, the capital of a pillar.
And now I will draw for you in this drawing the Gibeim in the shape of a triangle.
So he's telling us, I'm just going to interrupt you again, it's why I became a rabbi. Yeah, I can interrupt and call it teaching. That the Gibeim, these cups, in his diagram will be represented by a triangle. Okay? That's the way he's going to diagram it.
And the kaftorim as a circle.
That's the thing that he just told us isn't a perfect circle. He's going to diagram as a circle.
And the perat as a semicircle in order to make the drawing easier.
Very nice of him. He wants to make his life easier while he's trying to draw it. He's not famous for his artwork. He's no Leonardo da Vinci. He may have been brilliant in lots of other ways, but Rambam never claimed to be an artist. So for his diagram, he's telling us what the code is, what the key is. When you see a semicircle, that's the perach. That's the flower cup where the actual burning would take place. When you see a triangle, that's the gavia. That's the cup flange decorative piece. And when you see the circle, that's the kaftor. That's the part that actually is more like an egg shape. Okay? Keep going.
Since my intent in this drawing is not that you should know the exact form of a gibia, since I have just explained it to you. Rather, my intent is to show you the number of the gibeim, the kaftorim, and the prachim, and their placement, and the length of places of the arms of the menorah that are empty, and that of the places that have kaftorim and prachim, and its general appearance. And here is the drawing of all of these.
Dun dun dun! On the right-hand side. Okay? Do we see the drawing on the right-hand side? The one that looks, you know, a little simplistic, right? With the writing scribbles up at the top, exactly. That's Rambam's diagram of what the menorah of the Mishkan and then later the temple looked like. Do we understand how we read that?
But they aren't even.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, they're not even. We end up. For those of you who are playing at home and who haven't downloaded the handout, you end up with this sort of weird semicircles at the top that are not level. They don't all go up to the same level. And what else is unusual? Thinking oil lamp? Yeah, you're going to be dripping right out.
But the lines are even, it's just a little,
Yes, but the lines underneath them, what he must have done with a ruler, and I don't have a ruler, do come up evenly to the top. It looks, as I heard one commentator describe, a little bit like a shish kebab. That you got this long, you got these thin shafts, and he just sort of shoved all the elements onto them, skewered them to show what it looked like. We can also notice another oddity that, in addition to the circular kaftor, which he already told us wasn't circular, we also have the shaped like a triangle in the wrong direction. Because we already know that the wider part was closer to the top than it was to the bottom. Why did he draw it like this? Because he's no Leonardo da Vinci, exactly. And as he already said, I'm not drawing this to you so you'll know exactly what it looked like. I'm drawing it to you so you know where there were and where there weren't and how many there were. It's just this is a diagram, a schematic.
So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this looks an awful like the Chabad menorah, and I'm understanding that this was not done by Rambam to give homage to the text, but to make clear what his interpretation. So that begs the question: is Chabad giving honor to Rambam?
Okay, so what you'll see on the handout, and indeed what you see, we'll do the handout, the picture first, then the text. But if you notice, right underneath the Rambam schematic, you have a more detailed picture of the menorah, and this is the Chabad diagram of what they believe the menorah should look like. And indeed, if you have been around and seen any of the public menorot that Chabad puts up for Hanukkah, it looks like this, plus an extra branch. Now, they normally don't go through all the trouble of putting in the extra decorative elements, but they do make the general shape to be these straight vertical or straight diagonal lines for the branches. And indeed believe that that is the correct way that it should be constructed. Not that this is an artistic flair, not that this is a convenience or style or a branding of the way they like the menorah, but that this is precisely what the menorah would have looked like. And their foundation for that is Rambam's diagram, and the fact that the Torah doesn't say that anything was curved. The Torah didn't say that you curve the branches, it just says the branches come out. So why would you necessarily assume that they were curved? And indeed, they have additional support, because right underneath it, we have from Avraham ben Rambam, that is to say, Rambam's own son, the phrase that reads, the 6 branches, meaning of the menorah, extended upward from the center shaft of the menorah in a straight line, as depicted by my father, and not in a semicircle as depicted by others. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Okay, because we do have a bit of an issue here, because first of all, Avraham ben Rambam says, this is what my father drew, not what he said. And we do actually know from other places that occasionally his son, when he was interpreting his father's writings, doesn't seem to have actually gotten it right. When he recounts what his dad said, his testimony seems very, very reliable. But when he interprets his father's writings, he's like any other commentary, which is he's not necessarily closer to the tree than any other apple. When it comes to just being able to interpret. When it comes to transmit, my father taught me this, or my father told me this, that generally seems to be a very reliable account of Rambam's opinion and does match elsewhere what Rambam says. But here we already have the very basic question of Rambam himself does not seem to be saying that he is drawing a one-to-one accurate representation of the menorah, but is instead simply trying to draw a rough and tumble schematic so that you would understand what the layout of the branches and their decorative elements along the shaft would be like. Now we know that, therefore, those who try to use his schematic as a perfectly accurate representation are going to run into a couple problems. One of them you might be able to see just by comparing the 2 pictures, the one from Rambam's diagram and the one beneath from Chabad. What do you notice that might be problematic? It's pretty obvious if you just look generally.
The triangles are still facing wrong.
The triangles are still facing the downwards, exactly. But more to the point is the diagram here, the modern version, a accurate representation of what was drawn by Rambam.
Because they have all the cups even, but these
Yeah.
aren't. You're all-
No, they have already interpreted the schematic to believe that where he drew them, he actually meant they should all be clustered up at the top, even though he drew them scattered along the shaft. And that's their interpretation. But his diagram doesn't show that. So there's already a liberty being taken with the schematic in order to make a modern representation, more than simply interpreting what the circles, triangles, and semicircles meant.
Actually, on the modernized drawing, those little flanges are turned the other way.
Correct, exactly, yes. So how do we know what the menorah looked like? If Rambam and the other sages from the Middle Ages don't agree, and we have one of the most basic design elements, the shape of the arms, up for grabs apparently.
There are a few ancient depictions.
Thank you for looking at the bottom of the page.
The Argentinos.
Okay, if we look at the bottom of the page, and should have brought in a bigger piece of paper for pointing these things out, we have ancient depictions of the menorah. If we start over here on the left, we have coins from the Hashmonean and late Second Temple period, which show a menorah with what type of branches? Curved, right? And then we have here in this middle section a very interesting wall drawing. Other cave people used to draw animals and antelopes and buffalo. We drew menorah. This was taken from a wall in the temple, in the time of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The house is believed to have been owned by a Kohen, and it's only, I think the measurement was about 150 meters from the Temple Mount. So this was prime Jerusalem real estate back in its day, and whoever lived there apparently thought that it would be fitting to have a drawing of the menorah in his house. And so you can see the parts of that plaster where the drawing remains, and then the artist paralleling, trying to fill in the gaps where the plaster unfortunately has deteriorated over time. And what would we say about those drawings? What do those branches look like? Curved. What else do we notice about it in terms of the layout of the kaftor and the givim, the cups?
Everything is up and up, and the whole.
It seems to run the entire length of the shaft, more or less. On the far right, we have a drawing, because it's hard to see from the photos, of the Arch of Titus. What's the Arch of Titus?
It's a depiction of the triumph of the Romans taking the Jews, including the menorah, back to Rome.
Exactly. So when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, they were pretty happy because we were a problem for them, and them putting us down, they thought, look who's still here,
And they're not.
was a big deal for them. Was a big deal for them. Indeed, their conquest of Judea, as they called it, was one of the only conquests of another people that was commemorated in coins within the Roman Empire. We were not some little nobody province in the Roman Empire. We were a major problem to them, and they were very happy when they crushed the Great Rebellion and destroyed the temple.
My reading of Roman history has been when they took this gold, and that's what paid for the Colosseum.
And they took the treasures of the temple back to Rome, and he erected an enormous triumphal arch in order to commemorate this great and magnificent victory. And along the arch, there is a picture of the menorah being carried out of Jerusalem, being carried back to Rome, along with many of the other implements of the temple. And this is what it looks like.
there was a tradition not for Jews visiting Rome, not to walk under the Arch of Titus because of the sad event, the painfully sad event of the destruction. But on the day that Israel was declared a state, a legitimate country, visitors walked under this Arch of Titus singing Am Yisrael. Just imagine this.
Wow.
Quite a moment.
History going the other way.
Quite a moment.
All right. Back to our crafting. What do we notice about the depiction of the menorah along and the arch? What about its branches? Curved. What about the ornamentation along the branches?
Very ornate.
Very ornate, and more or less along the length of the shaft. Do we notice anything unusual about this depiction?
The base.
The base. The base. There's a whole lot of what on the base?
There's like mythical monsters.
Yeah, there are. There are a whole lot of mythical, or at least semi-mythical depictions of real animals that are along the base of this menorah. That's a problem. Do we honestly think that these various creatures were sitting there happily on the base of the menorah, sitting inside the temple of Jerusalem? Well, there were a couple explanations for that, so that have been trotted out throughout history. One explanation is, neener, 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 they got the wrong menorah.
Right.
That this was a purpose fake that the Jews had while they got the real one secreted away somewhere. And indeed, those who are the proponents of the straight-branched menorah say, and that's why this is curved, because that way any Jew who knew would know this wasn't a real one. Problem with that, of course, is that we have tons of other archaeological evidence that says that every Jew in antiquity looked at the menorah and thought that it had round arms. But it's an interesting idea, nonetheless. But all the archaeological evidence, and indeed these are the oldest archaeological evidence, but there are additional mosaics and drawings and frescoes throughout the hundreds of years right after the destruction of the temple, all of which show curved arms in varying degrees of artistic skill. So then we have to come up with another explanation if we don't like that one for the base. And one explanation is, well, guess who probably embellished upon this? What's that? Nope, it's way after Solomon. So there's a teaching in the Talmud that when the Jews came back from exile, the first menorah that they built was pretty schwach, because they weren't that rich. I mean, the second temple, as we know, when it was first rebuilt, was not exactly an inspiring structure compared to Solomon's temple that had been destroyed. And the Talmud says the first one they did was sort of base metal covered in tin. So it's kind of a pale shadow of the original one. And then eventually they replaced it with silver. And then eventually they replaced it with gold. Well, in that same style, what happened to the original temple rebuilt by Ezra and crew after the end of the Babylonian captivity? Herod happened to that temple. Herod the Great. We call him great because he was a magnificent builder.
He was noteworthy.
He was noteworthy because a lot of the things that we still get to see in Israel and that were famous in his day as well were built by him. And there's one explanation that says Herod the Great is the one who designed the base as an embellishment to the menorah. And Herod the Great, as we know, unfortunately was not what you would exactly call the most pious and devout of Jews. And so therefore, for him to have these additional things on it, no problem. But there's a problem with that description, or that explanation, which is, we know, at least from the Talmud, that when, and from other sources, that when Herod tried to put an eagle in the Temple of Jerusalem as a symbol of the allegiance with Rome, it caused a riot. So the idea that these other mythical beasts would be allowed to be huddled around the base of the menorah inside the Beit HaMikdash without causing massive protests from the Jewish population, that's a little sketchy there. Third explanation is this was Roman triumphalism. That when the Romans were dragging this back to Rome, they wanted to A, attach something to it that would make it easier to carry in a display mode, and B, attach something to it that would show that the Roman gods and the Roman nation had conquered ours. And so they deliberately adorned it with these scenes of Roman mythology rather than leaving it plain, because it made it easier to carry and it made it easier for them to show off that neener neener they won. How are we doing?
Except that if the Romans embellished the base, maybe they embellished the rest of it too. How do we know any of the rest of it
Or
matches what may have been?
Correct. That makes it makes the arch itself a very suspect source for what the even though it's the best depiction from that time period, the most elaborate, the most ornate depiction, it becomes very suspect if we believe the Romans may have been tampering with it as a way of propagandizing their victory. The basic shape we have at least corroborated from every other antique source, but the details, they get a little sketchy. And in fact, most of the other details, as you can see in a bit of a sketch here, and that fresco, and a little bit on these others, tend to show a base which is more of a three-footed triangular kind of base. So the idea that it was this hexagonal or octagonal, I actually can't tell from the Arch of Titus what they were trying to build there, is probably unlikely. So that does mean that there are some doubts about how accurate or how perfect a depiction it was of the real menorah.
It certainly isn't 3-footed.
It certainly doesn't seem to have 3 feet exactly, and people would then say that this was put over the 3 feet which were underneath it. But it made a much more solid base for carrying it back in triumphal.
Neither is it really circular.
Nor is it really circular. But then we wouldn't expect the Romans to be honoring our traditions.
Right.
Okay, so what do we take from this? Easy to recreate the menorah? No, not if you want anyone to agree. Absolutely not. There's a midrash and then an answer to the midrash in our tradition, and since we are just coming up on our time, I'm going to go ahead and read them. So in the text that we just read, it actually says that the menorah will be made, shall be made. And Rashi, channeling the midrash, says, wait a minute, why is that in the passive voice? Why isn't it, and you shall make the menorah? Because, he argues, the menorah will be made by itself. Since Moses found difficulty with it, meaning figuring out what the menorah was actually supposed to look like, the Holy One, blessed is he, said to him, cast the talent of gold, cast the lump of gold into the fire, and it'll be made by itself. That's why it's written, te'aseh, not te'aseh, but rather te'aseh. I know, it's almost exactly the same, but it is a slight grammatical difference, because it puts it into the passive voice.
It's interesting that they could make the angels out of a solid piece of gold, standing with wings outstretched,
Right?
and can't make the menorah.
Well,
You know, it's just,
it is a little.
one seems so mind-boggling. How could they do it out of a block and have all of that? And it's to come from that block and not make an oil lamp with 7 branches.
Well, but think of the difficulty of actually crafting the multiple shafts coming out of a center thing, out of a block of metal, of how skilled you have to be hammering it to lump the metal into the branches and then squeeze it out with the hammering technique.
Wait a minute. So Moses had difficulty making the menorah according to God.
Right?
So God said to him, ask B'Tzalel.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
Ibn Ezra says about this midrash that Rashi has brought, this midrash is not meant to be taken literally.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
That's referring to that.
And he says, see Numbers 8:4, where it says that Moses actually had it made, rather than it just, boop, came out of the fire by itself. So rather, everyone who looked at the menorah was amazed that a human could make such a thing. So when they say it made itself because it was so amazing, it didn't mean it made itself. It meant nobody would believe that a human had made it because the menorah itself was so amazing to look upon. So it wasn't meant as a midrash, it was meant as a superlative description. Okay? Because we do know from the rest of the Torah that it does seem pretty clear that the menorah was human-made. And certainly we'd also have trouble believing then that Ezra and crew, when they came back from the Babylonian captivity, would have been able to make something that Moses couldn't get made. And certainly it doesn't say anything about a miracle happening for them to have a menorah popping out of the fire. So it definitely seems to have been within the reach of human craftsmen, even if it was not easy to be done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it does take special skill.
Does take extremely special skill. Extremely special skill. Yeah. What's that?
And you have it.
And to have the balancing of it.
That's
Exactly. I mean, as Marion's pointing out, you know, it may be easy to draw branches going around, but to have exactly the right amount of density of gold in each of the branches so the whole thing doesn't just tip over would have been extremely difficult as well. One last thing, our very first paragraph that we're going to finish with, you know, typical fashion, points out to us that a person may not build a house in the model of the temple, or a porch in the model of the temple porch, or a courtyard in the middle of the temple courtyard, or a table in the model of the temple's table, or a menorah in the model of the temple menorah. That you can't build your own temple and then just put your bedroom and kitchen and all that kind of stuff in it. You're not allowed to build a house that is like the temple. You're not allowed to build a table that looks like the temple's table. And they're not allowed to build a menorah that looks like the temple menorah. But he may make one that has 5, 6, or 8 branches, but he may not make one with 7, even though it is of metals other than the ones used in the temple. So even if you want to make a copper menorah or an aluminum menorah, if you're trying to make it look like the one in the temple with the same number of branches and the same decorative elements going up it, no, don't do it. And Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda says even one of wood he may not make, because that is how the Hashmoneans made it, meaning that when they had to, when they were recreating, rededicating, they used wood to start, and then eventually, as we talked about, improved. So trying to figure out what the menorah looked like is actually fairly important if we want to make sure we don't transgress accidentally making one that looked like what the menorah looked like. After all, I can't avoid making something if I don't know what it looked like. I have to know what something looks like to make sure I don't do it. It's like saying, you know, don't drive over the speed limit. Well, what's the speed limit? I can't tell you. Well, how can I be sure I'm not going to drive over the speed limit then? You have to tell me what it is so I can avoid it. So,
Well, I don't have any problem with avoiding it, because as I figured out, there's about $4 million worth of gold in it.
yes, at current gold prices, it's not exactly the easy thing to want to make either. No. So that's a very good point to end on. But pointing out that there are layers and layers of understanding of what went into building the Mishkan, that this was not a simple synagogue decoration activity, but that this was trying to precisely mimic exactly what God had asked of us. And recognizing as well, with some humility, that we cannot perfectly recreate what God was asking of us, even in something as tangible as the menorah, should hopefully give us equal humility when trying to understand the other things that God has asked of us. And be open to the debate and discussion of straight, curved, and everything in between, to make sure that in the other aspects of our life we are also open to all the different depictions of what Jewish life should look like.
And we have to remember that it was 3 different descriptions. First, God said it.
Yep.
Then Moses wrote it down. Then Moses read it to whoever he wanted to manufacture the item. So already it's gone through 3 different versions. So how in the world could it possibly be exactly the way it was intended in the first place?
Well, the first one I have confidence that Ruach HaKodesh, that the Spirit of God was able to steer the creation of the first one, to make sure that it was exactly the way God wanted. My drawing, I claim no divine inspiration for. and indeed for all of our interpretation of Jewish law and Jewish understanding, we don't have the divine spirit resting upon us to say my interpretation is absolutely right and my diagram is absolutely right and everyone else who does it any way differently is a heretic. We don't have that privilege, place of position within the divine hierarchy, which is why we have to listen to other people.
And as time goes by and more interpretations of everything is passed on.
Absolutely.
It's like playing telephone.
Well, it's like playing telephone, or I prefer to think of it as actually we're homing in on it. The more and more we learn, and the more we've discussed, and the more we have tried to wrestle and tease out of the text, the more accurate description we have. Hopefully. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
What was the conclusion?